In this video, we're going to go over some of the things that a statistician needs to think about when they're conducting statistics, conducting studies. So a sample is a subset of the population that's being studied. So whatever you're trying to learn about when you're collecting data and doing statistics. For example, a sample to provide valid information for analysis, there are three things that we want to think about. So it must be large enough. So sometimes if you have a small sample, you could have conclusions made that weren't true for the whole population. So you need to make sure that it's large enough so that any differences just in individuals don't look big. Okay, it needs to be random. So if it's not random, for example, if you were studying a drug and you only looked at women, there might be something about women that drug has an effect on that wouldn't be true for everyone, for the whole population. And then you want it to be unbiased. And the large enough and the randomness also come into the wanting to be unbiased. You want to make sure that there aren't confounding variables, something else that is going on. So in this section, we're really going to talk about how you can avoid being biased. Okay. So one way that surveys could go wrong or data collection could be less than ideal is if you have dishonest data or just not reliable data. So one way that data cannot be reliable if it's collected through a voluntary response survey. So these would be things you see all the time on the internet. Here, someone's choosing to go and input their data. So for example, a review on Yelp or on Amazon or on any of those websites. You could even consider the way that we do student evaluations of professors at the end of the semester. Those are all voluntary response surveys. And the thing that can be the problem with those is that only those with strong opinions are going to fill out the survey. So they're the only ones who participate. So this is why if you go onto a review site, you'll either find the people who love the product, thought it was the best, or the people who hated it and found stuff wrong with it. So that's one thing to just be aware of when you have a voluntary response survey. If you're writing a survey, you need to be careful about loaded questions. So the wording of questions can have an impact on how people answer them. So for example, if you were going to ask a question, do you prefer a real Christmas tree or a fake tree? What the people might mean here is, do you prefer to cut down a living tree or do you prefer an artificial tree? But this word fake has a very negative connotation with it. So even if someone prefers an artificial tree, they don't want to admit their tree is fake. And so they may not answer that as honestly as they would if it was worded differently. Okay. So another way to kind of see this is that these next two questions are really asking the same thing. So the first one says, will you support the children in our school district this November? So they're asking, and if this was for a levy on a ballot, and they wanted to know how people are going to vote. Well, asking people to support the children, you're trying to elicit people to say that they're in favor of the levy. Right? People don't want to say that they're not going to support the children. However, if you ask the question, do you think the school district needs to take more of our money? Well, most people don't want to give up their money. So this is really trying to elicit an response that's against the levy. So the way that you word the question might lead people to answer in a way that's not how they truly feel. Okay, even the order Sorry about that. Even the order in which you ask the questions can have a way. So these two questions are asking the same thing. Would you agree that men run more stop signs than teenage drivers? Or would you agree that teenage drivers run more stop signs than men? So these are really asking the same thing, but people want to agree with something. When someone's asking them a question, it feels more comfortable as a human to agree. So the first choice usually gets more responses if you're asking this way that says, would you agree? Okay, you need to be careful about not exaggerating or asking more than one question at a time. So this question, do you believe that smoking should be banned in public and violators should be shot? That's going to confuse whoever is being asked that question, because you don't necessarily agree with both of those statements. Maybe you agree that smoking should be banned in public places, but most people would not think that those people should be shot. So you want to make sure when you're designing a study only to ask one question at a time. Okay, you need to be careful about who takes the measurement if you're measuring something. So if you're doing a study involving measurements, so for example, if it's a medical study and you're looking at blood pressure or weight or whatever, one, you want it to be consistent. So on a consistent machine or a consistent person. And you don't want the subject, the person themselves, taking the data, because that could either they could skew it, or it might be very hard for themselves to actually take those measurements. You want it to be an unbiased third party. Okay, and another thing you should be careful about are self-interest studies. So, I'm sure you've all seen commercials where they give a statistic, say it's a toothpaste commercial and they say 8 out of 10 dentists, want this toothpaste. Well, to get that statistic, they probably only asked dentists they already had a good relationship with. They may not make their study to be unbiased. So this asks the question, who is funding this study and what are their expectations? So it says one study result. After a survey of 250 hiring professionals, scuffed shoes was the most common reason for a male's failure to make a good first impression at the hiring interview. Well, if you found out that this study was funded by a shoe company or a shoe polish company, that would probably change your opinion of the statistic than if you heard it was from someone who didn't have a stake in making money off of whatever the statistic showed. Okay, so these are just some things. There would be other things you'd want to be very careful about too when you're doing a survey, but just some things to keep in mind when you're looking at statistics and how valid they are.